You'll just slow us down at the park. The words were spoken casually, tossed like crumbs at the edge of a breakfast table, but they landed heavy on me. I stood in the doorway, jacket half-zipped, holding my walking stick in one hand. My daughter's voice was light, almost apologetic, but not enough to soften the edge. Behind her, I could hear the shuffle of sneakers, the tapping of a phone, my grandson calling for his water bottle. Their morning was already moving without me. I forced a smile. I don't mind walking slowly. She shifted her eyes away, brushing at her hair. It's not just that, Mom. The boys want to run ahead, and we can't keep stopping. It's just easier this way. Easier. That word stung more than the first. Easier for whom? For her, to not have to wait. For them, to not glance back. For me, to remain here, in the quiet house that suddenly felt too still. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My voice might have broken if I tried. Instead, I nodded, as though the arrangement was perfectly reasonable, and stepped back so she could close the door. My grandson darted past with his cap crooked, the youngest trailed with a shoelace untied. My son-in-law gave me a quick wave, distracted. Then the door shut. The silence that followed was sharper than the words. I stood in the hallway with my jacket still half-zipped, walking stick leaning against my palm, listening to the muffled sound of the car pulling out of the driveway. For a long moment, I didn't move. I thought if I stayed still enough, maybe the air would stitch itself back together, maybe the day wouldn't feel so jagged. But the house had already sealed around me, leaving me on the wrong side of family. I took off the jacket, folded it slowly, laid it on the chair. My stick I set by the wall. And then, unsure of what to do with the sudden expanse of time, I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The kettle has become my retreat these past few years. The sound of water heating, the steam rising, the whistle sharp as a bird call, it gives shape to otherwise empty hours. I spooned tea leaves into the pot, steadying my hand as it shook just slightly. While it steeped, I set out 1 cup. Just one. It was the small things that pricked me most. Not that they had gone without me, I have learned to swallow disappointments over the years, but that my presence was framed as a burden, an obstacle. To be told I would slow them down. I kept hearing it in my head, as though the words had etched themselves into the walls. Slow them down. As if I were a stone tied to their ankles. I poured the tea and carried it to the table, my steps careful but steady. At 72, I am slower, yes. My knees ache, my breath shortens sooner than it used to. But I still walk. I still rise each morning with purpose. And yet, in their eyes, those small struggles erase the rest of me. I sipped, staring at the faint rings left by old cups on the wood. I remembered when the table was crowded, my husband tapping his newspaper, my daughter chattering about school, plates of toast vanishing as quickly as I set them down. The years had shifted so quietly that I hadn't noticed when the noise dwindled. Now, even on mornings when the family visited, I was an afterthought. I tried not to resent them. My daughter works long hours, my son-in-law juggles too much, the boys are restless with youth. Still, resentment curled at the edge of my chest, an unwelcome guest I couldn't dismiss. I finished the tea but didn't clear the cup right away. Instead, I reached for the scarf draped over the back of the chair. It was a soft wool one, pale green, a gift from an old neighbor. I tied it around my neck and listened to the clock tick. For a moment, I thought of lying down, letting the hours pass until they returned with their flushed cheeks and stories I wouldn't be part of. But something inside me resisted. The park was only a mile away. I had walked it many times before, slowly, yes, but I had walked it. I put my jacket back on. Took up my stick. Slipped my phone into my pocket. I didn't rush, I couldn't, but I didn't dawdle either. Each movement felt deliberate, as though I were gathering myself not just for a walk, but for a quiet act of defiance. The air outside was crisp, morning light slanting across the hedges. The streets smelled faintly of dew and petrol. My steps were measured, the stick tapping softly against the pavement. I could feel the stiffness in my hips, but also the steadiness of years of moving through aches. One step, then another. As I walked, I thought of all the times I had held back for others. For my husband, when he was ill, pacing my breath to his labored strides. For my daughter, when she was small, carrying her on my hip until my back ached. For my parents, when they grew frail, bending my own life to fit theirs. Always, I slowed myself for love. And now, love was asking me to stay behind because I was slower. The irony nearly made me laugh. Nearly. I reached the park entrance after 30 minutes. My breath was quickened, but my spirit steadier. The gates stood tall, green paint peeling at the edges. Beyond them, I could see families drifting along paths, joggers cutting sharp arcs, children racing toward swings. And there, just ahead, my daughter's family. The boys ran ahead, shrieking with laughter. My son-in-law jogged behind them. My daughter was pulling a bottle of water from her bag. I stopped at the entrance, leaning on my stick. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I debated turning back, avoiding the risk of an awkward encounter. But something in me, a flicker of pride, or maybe stubbornness, urged me forward. I stepped through the gates. The boys ran past without noticing, their eyes fixed on some game of chase. My son-in-law gave a distracted smile. But my daughter froze when she saw me. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something like guilt. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I simply nodded and kept walking. Not fast, not with any show of triumph. Just steady. I passed her at the entrance, the scarf warm at my neck, the stick firm in my hand. For once, I wasn't asking permission to belong. I walked past my daughter without meeting her eyes, the sound of my stick tapping against the pavement steadying me more than any words could. The truth is, I had no plan beyond that moment. No destination, no grand statement. Just the stubborn insistence that I belonged here as much as anyone else. For once, I wasn't waiting to be asked. The path curved gently toward the lake, where the water caught the light and turned it into ripples of silver. I breathed in slowly, letting the coolness of the air settle into my chest. I could hear the boys in the distance, their laughter carrying across the open space, the kind of sound that once would have drawn me like a magnet. Now, it felt like a reminder of how far I had drifted from the center of their lives, even while standing just a few steps away. I found a bench beneath a plane tree, the bark mottled and peeling in strips, and lowered myself onto it carefully. The wood was cool against my palms. From here, I could see joggers circling the path, parents pushing prams, older couples walking hand in hand. It struck me how each moved at their own pace, yet no one seemed to be in anyone's way. The park had room for all of them. The contradiction of being told I didn't fit weighed heavier as I watched. I sat there for a while, listening. The distant buzz of a lawnmower somewhere beyond the trees. The high squeal of a swing set. A dog barking, sharp and eager. These sounds folded around me like a blanket, reminding me that life continues whether or not we're invited to join. My tea this morning had cooled too quickly, I regretted leaving the house without a thermos. Still, I reached into my pocket and touched the folded handkerchief there, a habit of mine since my husband's days. He always carried one, and when he died, I kept his in the top drawer. Eventually I began carrying one of my own again, not for tears but for steadiness. Something about its weight in my pocket made me feel anchored. As I sat, a woman about my age passed by with a small dog tugging at the lead. She nodded politely, the kind of brief acknowledgement shared between strangers who recognize each other's solitude. I nodded back. It wasn't conversation, but it was enough to soften the air. I thought back, unbidden, to the years when I had been the one organizing outings. Packing sandwiches, wiping sticky hands, gathering hats and bottles before anyone else thought to. I remembered how my daughter used to cling to my arm when we went to the park, asking me to push her higher on the swings, squealing when I pretended to chase her down the hill. The memory sat uneasily beside this morning's words, "You'll just slow us down." The same child who once begged me not to let go now asked me to stay behind. The shift had happened gradually, of course. It wasn't cruelty. It was life reshaping itself, priorities adjusting, energy redirected. But the bluntness of her words had ripped the slow fabric, leaving me staring at the truth more plainly than I was prepared to. I pushed myself up from the bench after a while, determined not to sit too long. If I did, stiffness would set in, and the walk home would be harder. My stick tapped again, rhythm against stone, and I followed the path toward the lake. The water shone brighter as I approached, a pair of ducks gliding across its surface. A child tossed crumbs, her mother laughing when gulls swooped down to steal them. The ordinary beauty of it soothed something in me. I noticed then how my body was carrying me, slower, yes, but steady. Every step required awareness now, the placing of heel, then toe, the shift of balance. What others saw as limitation, I felt as discipline. Age had taught me to walk deliberately, to notice the ground underfoot, the breeze brushing across my cheek, the smell of cut grass. Slowness was not just lack, it was presence. I stopped by the railing, resting one hand on the cool metal. Across the water, I could see my family, my grandsons darting ahead, my daughter calling after them. For a moment, I wondered if she felt the sting of my presence here, if she was wrestling with the words she had spoken earlier. But I didn't move closer. I stayed where I was, giving them space while giving myself the dignity of choosing my own spot. I watched the ducks a little longer, then continued along the path. At the far end of the lake was a small cafe kiosk, the smell of coffee and pastries drifting toward me. On impulse, I joined the short queue. When my turn came, I ordered a tea and a plain scone. The young woman at the window handed me the paper cup with a smile. "Jam?" she asked. I almost refused, old habits of frugality, of not making things complicated. But instead, I said yes. She slipped a small packet into the bag, and I carried it with me to a nearby table. It was nothing, really, a scone, a cup of tea, but sitting there alone with them felt like an act of reclaiming something. I spread the jam clumsily with the wooden knife, laughed quietly at the way it tore the pastry more than cut it, and ate slowly. Each bite was mine alone, not shared, not waited for, not dismissed. As I sipped the tea, I let myself think of what the rest of the day might hold. I could return home after this, curl into my chair with a book, let the afternoon pass in quiet. Or I could keep walking, take the longer path that circled the park, challenge my legs and lungs a little more. For once, I realized I didn't have to adjust to anyone else's pace. The choice was mine. The thought was both freeing and sad. Freedom tasted faintly of loss. But I held on to it anyway. I lingered until the tea cooled, then packed the napkin into my pocket and rose. The path ahead looked inviting, sun slanting across it in stripes of light and shade. My stick tapped in rhythm once again, steady as a drumbeat. Somewhere behind me, I could hear my grandsons shouting in triumph as they found each other in a game of hide-and-seek. I didn't turn. I let their voices fade into the background, like music carried by the wind. My steps led me forward, into a stretch of path I hadn't walked in years. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trailing behind. I was simply moving, on my own terms. The longer path curved away from the lake, drawing me beneath a canopy of trees where the air felt cooler, tinged with the faint sweetness of damp earth. My stick tapped against the path in a rhythm I had come to rely on: tap, step, shift, breathe. Each sound reassured me I was still moving forward, however slowly. I thought of how children march when they play soldiers, stamping with vigor, trying to make their presence known. My own march now was quieter, measured, but it was still mine. A couple brushed past me, their conversation flowing too quickly to catch. I caught only a fragment. "Don't have time for that, not today." The words lingered with me, though they weren't meant for me. Time, I thought, is what I have now. Too much, some days. And yet, when others look at me, they see only the time I might take from them. Halfway up the slope, my breath grew shorter. The incline was not steep, but my knees protested. I paused, leaning heavier on the stick, pretending to admire a patch of daisies that had pushed up defiantly between cracks in the pavement. Their white petals were slightly ragged, some browned at the tips, but they stood upright all the same. I let the sight steady me before I moved on. A little further along, a jogger slowed beside me. He must have been in his 40s, sweat soaking through his shirt. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, genuine concern softening his tone. I nodded, though my breath betrayed me. "Just catching it." "Take your time," he said with an encouraging smile, then jogged ahead. His words stayed with me longer than he did. Take your time. Such a simple allowance, one I rarely heard anymore. I resumed walking, slower now, but with more determination. My daughter's words from that morning echoed again, "You'll just slow us down." Perhaps that was true. But here, on this path, I wasn't slowing anyone. I was only finding my own pace. At the bend, I nearly stumbled. My foot caught on an uneven patch of stone, and for a split second the ground tilted. My heart lurched. The stick saved me, jabbed hard against the pavement, jolting my wrist but steadying my body. I froze, chest pounding, the world too loud in that moment. The chatter of birds, the bark of a dog, even the rustle of leaves felt amplified. I breathed, deeply, until the tremor in my knees settled. It shook me, though, how close I had been to falling. And I knew, had my family been here, it would have been proof to them. Proof that I should have stayed home. Proof that I was, indeed, slowing them down. I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to grant them that satisfaction, even in thought. I pressed onward, stubborn. Each step after that was a small victory, each measured pace a refusal to surrender. Yet beneath the pride lay a flicker of fear. What if next time the stick wasn't enough? What if there was no one to see, no one to help? The thought dug deep, but I carried it with me rather than letting it stop me. Near the crest of the path, I found another bench. I lowered myself carefully and let my body sink into the wood. From here, the view stretched wide, the lake glinting through the trees, children darting like scattered birds, a dog leaping into the shallows after a stick. My family was nowhere in sight, though I knew they were somewhere in that sprawl, folded into a narrative that did not include me. I pulled the scone wrapper from my pocket and brushed away the crumbs, then touched the jam packet I had saved. I hadn't finished it earlier. Now, peeling back the foil, I tasted a fingertip of sweetness. It was such a small indulgence, yet it filled my mouth with memory. Breakfasts on holidays, my husband spreading jam thick on toast, insisting it tasted better when the jar was nearly empty because it meant nothing was wasted. I closed my eyes and let the memory settle like sunlight across old wood. When I opened them, a boy had appeared at the edge of the bench, no more than 7 or 8. His face was smeared with chocolate, his shoelaces dragging. He looked at me, then at the jam in my hand. "Is that good?" he asked. I smiled. "It is." He nodded seriously, then scampered off without another word. I watched him go, laughter bubbling in my chest unexpectedly. Children are honest in ways adults rarely dare to be. He saw the jam, wanted to know, and asked. No judgment. No dismissal. Only curiosity. The moment steadied me. I wasn't invisible here. Not yet. I sat a little longer, then rose again. The path ahead wound downward, easier now, and I welcomed the release in my knees. As I walked, I thought of what independence meant. Not grand gestures, not dramatic speeches. Independence was this, choosing the longer path even when tired, steadying yourself after a stumble, tasting jam alone on a bench. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache that lingered. I wanted to be seen, not just by strangers or passing children, but by the ones I had given so much of myself to. My daughter, my grandsons. I wanted them to see that slowing down didn't mean stopping, that my pace didn't erase my presence. By the time I reached the bottom of the hill, the ache in my legs had deepened, but so had my resolve. I followed the curve of the path, letting it lead me not back to the gate, but deeper into the park. If I was to be left behind, then I would decide where behind was. The air smelled faintly of grilled onions from a food cart somewhere ahead. My stomach stirred. I hadn't planned to stay this long, but something in me resisted the thought of going home just yet. Not while the day was still unfolding, not while I still had the strength to keep moving. So I pressed on, each step carrying me further into a world that was both familiar and strangely new, a world where I was not waiting to be included, but quietly choosing to belong. The smell of grilled onions led me toward a food cart station near the open green. Children darted past with ice creams already melting onto their fingers. Couples leaned against bicycles, their laughter folding into the breeze. I paused, letting the hum of life move around me, almost forgetting that my own family was somewhere among them. I ordered a small paper tray of chips, though I wasn't terribly hungry. It was more about the act, claiming a piece of the afternoon for myself. The salt and heat filled my hands, the grease staining the napkin, and for a moment I was simply another park visitor, no slower or faster than anyone else. But then I saw them. Across the green, my grandsons were sprawled on the grass, red-faced from running. My son-in-law had dropped onto the ground beside them, scrolling through his phone. My daughter stood a little apart, her gaze sweeping the path. When her eyes landed on me, I recognized the flicker, first surprise, then hesitation, then that tight line of guilt she couldn't quite mask. I considered turning away, pretending not to see, slipping back into the stream of strangers. But I was tired of being invisible. So I walked toward them, my steps steady, though each one seemed to echo louder than it should. "Mom," she said when I reached them, her voice pitched carefully between welcome and apology. I lowered myself onto the grass beside the boys, ignoring the stiffness in my knees. "It's a good day for running," I said to them. They nodded distractedly, already busy arguing about who had won the last race. Children forgive with speed adults can never manage. My daughter crouched beside me. "You should have called." "We could have," she broke off, biting her lip. "Could have what?" I asked, not sharply, but firmly. She looked down at her hands. "Could have walked slower. Made it easier." The irony caught in my chest. "You told me I'd slow you down." She winced, and for a moment I thought she might cry. "I didn't mean." But I cut her off gently. "You did mean it. Maybe not cruelly. But you meant it." The words hung there, heavier than I expected. Around us, the park hummed on, dogs barked, a ball thudded, laughter rang. Yet in our small circle, silence pressed close. "I just wanted the boys to have fun," she murmured. "And they did," I said, nodding toward their flushed faces. "But you think they can only have fun without me?" Her shoulders slumped. I saw in her eyes the conflict, love tangled with impatience, duty tangled with resentment. It was not malice. It was the quiet selfishness of youth still busy with itself. I knew it because I had once been the same, with my own parents. Only now did I recognize the cruelty of that blindness. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the child she had been and the woman she had become. Both lived in that face. "But you did," I said softly. "And you will again, unless you learn to see me as more than my slowness." She didn't answer. Her hand hovered as if to touch mine, then fell back to her side. The boys shouted for her attention, pulling her away. She went to them gratefully, relief flickering like a shadow. I sat back on the grass, the chips cooling in my lap, and let the moment settle. I didn't feel triumph. Only a kind of weary honesty, as if something long avoided had finally been spoken aloud. After a while, I rose again, brushing crumbs from my skirt. My daughter glanced back, uncertain whether to invite me along or leave me to my own path. I spared her the choice. With my stick tapping steadily, I walked away, not toward the gate but deeper into the park, where the path stretched long and winding. My legs ached, my breath came shorter, but inside I felt strangely lighter. The confrontation had not mended anything, not yet, but it had marked a line. I was no longer silently accepting dismissal. I had spoken, however softly. And sometimes, that is where change begins. The path narrowed as I moved farther into the park, shaded by tall oaks whose branches knitted the sky into patches of blue and green. The air cooled, damp with the smell of leaves. My legs were beginning to tire in earnest now, the ache not just a whisper but a steady drumbeat in my knees. I slowed, though I had not been fast to begin with. I searched for a bench but found none close by. A prickle of unease stirred in me. I hadn't thought ahead, hadn't measured the distance. Pride had carried me, but pride didn't ease pain. I kept going, one step, then another, the stick clicking louder than usual, my breath roughened. It struck me then how vulnerable age makes you. One stumble, one turn too sharp, and the world could tip you onto the ground. I imagined lying there, waiting, watching strangers hesitate before stepping forward. The thought chilled me. Still, I pressed on. Finally, at the bend, a bench appeared like mercy. I sank onto it with a sigh, leaning the stick against my leg. My chest rose and fell, slower, steadier. The world carried on around me, a father running after his toddler, a pair of teenagers skating past with careless ease. None of them noticed me. Perhaps that was a blessing. Perhaps it was the deepest loneliness. I rubbed at my knees, feeling the stubborn swell of joints that had served me faithfully for decades. My hands looked older than I remembered, skin thinned, veins raised. I thought of how my daughter once held these same hands to steady her first steps, how she had clung so tightly I had laughed and begged her to let go. Now she wished me to stay behind so she could walk faster. The weight of that truth pressed down, heavier than the ache in my legs. I blinked hard, refusing to let the sting of tears gather. I had shed enough over the years, for my husband, for friends buried, for dreams gone quiet. I would not cry now over a park bench. "Are you all right?" The voice startled me. A young man had paused nearby, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His hair was messy, his clothes paint-splattered, as though he had come straight from some studio. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though my breath betrayed me. He tilted his head. "Would you like some water?" "I've got a bottle spare." I hesitated, then nodded. He handed it over, cool plastic against my palm. I sipped, grateful. "Thank you," I said. "No trouble," he replied. He glanced at the sketchbook tucked under his arm. "I come here to draw. People, mostly. The way they move. You caught my eye earlier." I stiffened. "Me?" He smiled, not unkindly. "You walk with such intention. Not many do." I had no answer to that. Instead, I handed the bottle back. He waved it off. "Keep it." Then, with a quick nod, he moved on, already pulling a pencil from his pocket as though the world demanded his attention more urgently elsewhere. I sat with his words long after he left. "You walk with such intention." To him, my slowness was not a hindrance but a kind of focus. A way of being. It startled me, this reframing. Eventually, I rose again, the bottle tucked into my bag. My legs protested, but I urged them on. Not far ahead, I could see the edge of the park where the path curved toward the main road. Home lay beyond, but I wasn't ready for its silence yet. Instead, I turned toward the pond, where geese gathered noisily, their wings flapping like unruly banners. I lowered myself onto another bench and watched them bicker and preen. The water shimmered in the afternoon light. For a while, I let the sounds wash over me, not resisting the ache, not fighting the loneliness. It was there, yes, but so was the memory of the stranger's words, the taste of jam, the steady rhythm of my stick. Small things, fragile things, but they were mine. The day was slipping toward evening now, shadows stretching long. I knew my family would be leaving soon, packing up snacks and coaxing tired boys into the car. They would return home sun-flushed and loud, filling the house with stories of races and games. And I would have my own story, though I doubted they would ask for it. That thought cut deeper than I expected. To live unseen is one kind of pain. To live unasked is another. I stayed on the bench until the sky began to tint gold. Then, gathering myself, I rose once more. My body ached, my steps were slower, but there was a steadiness in me that hadn't been there this morning. I wasn't sure what waited at home. Perhaps more silence. Perhaps the faint, awkward apology of a daughter not ready to face her own words. But I knew this. I had walked the park on my own terms, stumbled but not fallen, lingered where I chose. And for the first time in years, I felt a small ember of self returning. As I headed toward the gate, the geese honked behind me, their clamor filling the air like rough music. I smiled faintly. The park had not left me behind, after all. The light was thinning as I reached the far edge of the park, where the trees gave way to open road. The sun had begun its descent, and the shadows stretched long across the pavement like tired arms. My stick tapped alongside me, a sound I had grown to love today, steady, certain, like a heart that had not forgotten its duty. I had walked farther than I'd planned. My knees were heavy, my hips protesting with every incline, but still I pressed forward. It wasn't the kind of pain that demanded surrender. It was the kind that reminded me I was still alive, still moving, still here. Ahead, near the main gate, I saw them. My family. They hadn't noticed me yet. The boys were sprawled on the grass, faces flushed and hair wild from running. My son-in-law was packing a backpack, cramming wrappers and bottles into side pockets. My daughter stood slightly apart, scanning the field as though counting heads. When her eyes found me, she froze. There was no malice in her gaze, only surprise, and something that looked like unease. The morning's words had not left her. Perhaps she had replayed them once or twice, heard the edge she hadn't intended, felt the weight she had placed on me. But apology sat far behind her lips, trapped by pride or by habit. I could have turned down the side street, avoided the confrontation. Slipped away home, let the day end quietly. But I had done too much slipping away already. If I was to live in truth, then truth demanded I be seen. So I walked on. The boys noticed first, springing up. "Gran," they shouted, waving their arms with careless joy. Children forgive without conditions, they remember the warmth of your hands more than the sharpness of words. I raised mine in return, smiling despite myself. My daughter's expression tightened. "Mom," she said as I drew near. "I'm heading home," I told her simply. My voice was calm, even. "You enjoy the rest of your evening." She looked at me, lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. I saw conflict in her eyes, love tangled with guilt, impatience with duty. She wanted to say more, but couldn't. Perhaps she didn't yet know how. So I didn't wait. I nodded once, turned, and kept walking. Behind me, I heard the boys clamoring for ice cream, their voices overlapping, tugging their parents' attention back to the small urgencies of childhood. Life drew them onward, as it should. I didn't chase after it. The streets beyond the park felt quieter, less alive. Houses lined in neat rows, each with its own garden, each with its own secrets. A man bent over a flower bed, trowel in hand. A woman leaned from a window to shake crumbs from a tablecloth. The air smelled of damp earth and faint cooking. Everyday life, unremarkable and steady. My legs slowed, but my mind was restless. I thought of the years behind me, the mornings when I had risen before dawn to pack lunches, the evenings when I had ironed shirts until my shoulders burned, the countless hours I had bent my life around others. My pace had always been set by someone else, a child's cry, a husband's illness, an aging parent's need. I had slowed myself willingly, lovingly. And now, when I moved at my own slower pace, they called it burden. I let the thought pass through me like wind. Resentment is heavy, I did not want to carry it. But neither would I dismiss it. Truth has its weight, and sometimes the carrying is necessary. By the time I reached my street, the first lamps were flickering on, casting pale circles on the pavement. My key was warm from my pocket as I turned it in the lock. The door creaked the way it always did, familiar as breath. I stepped inside. The house greeted me with its silence. Once, that silence would have pressed down, too loud, too final. But tonight it felt different. Not an emptiness, but a waiting. I hung my jacket carefully, propped my stick against the wall. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle, listening to the rush of water and the steady tick of the clock. My scarf, pale green, I draped across the chair. These small actions, these rituals, were anchors. As the kettle began to hiss, I thought of the stranger in the park, the artist with paint on his sleeves. "You walk with such intention," he had said. The words had startled me then. They steadied me now. I set the tea to steep, the steam rising soft as breath. My hands moved with care, but inside me, a quiet fire stirred. Today, I had been told I would slow them down. Today, I had walked the park anyway. Today, I had stumbled but not fallen. I had spoken truths I had long swallowed, tasted sweetness on a bench, accepted kindness from a stranger, listened to the clamor of geese, and let the world unfold at my pace. The kettle's whistle faded. I poured the tea into my favorite cup, a chipped one with a blue rim, older than my daughter, older than the life she now lived without me at its center. I carried it to the table, set it on the wood that bore the faint rings of breakfasts long gone. The silence around me felt softer now. Not absence, but presence. My presence. I sat, lifting the cup, and let the warmth fill me. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped away, the streetlight humming faintly. I took a slow sip and thought, they may walk faster, but I am still walking. And in that thought, I was no longer behind. I was simply myself.